So hello at Lightbox Expo 2020, and thanks for joining us in these extraordinary circumstances to discuss Supercell's brand of cinematics and what goes into making them. My name is Eric, and I'm a marketing artist at Supercell. And joining me today are my colleagues Chris Bancroft, also a marketing artist, based with me in San Francisco, and Michael Gurman, a brand marketer, writer, and creative partner in crime for most of the spots we'll be discussing today. And also joining us are the ones, the important ones, the ones under the spotlight today. Directors Borja Pena, Trevor Conrad, Jack Anderson, all of PSYOP LA, and Sammy Moore and Ewan Stenhouse from Golden Wolf Animation in New York and London. And hopefully I didn't butcher anyone's name. So little background. Every time we release a cinematic animation on usually YouTube, we get a lot of love, and we get more than a few trolls, and we also get a lot of requests to buff or nerf one of our characters. But there's always a comment that runs something along these lines, which is make a movie already. And to those who ask for that, thank you. That's very flattering. And you may be pleasantly surprised by what's coming, but I'm not going to give any more spoilers on that subject. But for now, the truth is this: Supercell makes games. The people who've been giving you a taste of what Clash of Clans or Brawl Stars movie might taste like or feel like work for our amazing partner studios from all over. So when you ask for a movie, what you're really asking for is more of the kind of work that these guys are largely responsible for. So Chris, Michael, and me and other Supercell artists and creatives work with these men and women to bring these animations to life. But the real production happens with them, under their direction, and at their studios. And so that's where we want to start today. So gentlemen, welcome. Just by way of a little bit more intro, I wanted to talk first about setting, because we've built all of these worlds essentially from nothing, or next to nothing, which is just a little screens on a mobile device. So starting in 2016, we started working on movies and whatnot for Clash Royale, which again was a mobile game. Hopefully many of you are familiar with it. And when we started with this, we had some reference from an earlier game, Clash of Clans, which we'd done great cinematics for, Legend of the Lost Lava Pup, even a Super Bowl ad back in the day with Liam Neeson. But we made these new worlds essentially from scratch. And so I wanted to talk about that. So starting with you, Borja, you were involved in some of the earliest Clash Royale movies, and you were basically creating those worlds from nothing. Can you tell us a little more about the inspiration for that process?
Of course. I think the main thing was to make sure that when you see the arenas, like for example, the Royal Arena was the first one we worked with on the original films, the Rules of the Duel films, which had the Anthem film in it as well. And for that, I think the most important thing was to make sure that when you see the cinematic version, and then when you have played the game for so long, that there's an instant connection between the two, so that they're not completely different, but they're clearly inspired by, in the sense that we expand on the scale so that we can make it much larger and much more detailed. And one thing that's interesting is that when you play the game, the characters are much bigger, and they have to be, so that you can see them on smaller screens and on bigger screens. But once you put those characters in the film world, and if you were to design the arena to that scale and make the characters kind of how you would see them in the game, the same way in the cinematic version, suddenly you come up with a problem, which is that the characters don't have a lot of room to traverse and to run when they're going from one side to the other. And one thing with these films that is very cool is that they're centered around epic battles. Every film, some kind of awesome epic battle, and then we focus on a character and their sort of experience during that battle, depending on what we're trying to feature. But when you put a camera down there, and when you get these characters running in there, in order for the battle to feel as energetic as like Gladiator or something like that, you really need scale. You need distance. You want to follow the characters with the camera. You want to run with them, and you want to run with them long enough that it feels epic and it feels like a really nice high energy moment. But then you also don't want to run with them so long that it takes a very long time to get from one tower to the other. So the first big challenge designing these arenas from game to the cinematics was the issue of scale. And I think a big thing that really inspired the scale was definitely that from any kind of perspective that we see from high up, you can really relate it to the game. But when you're down there, that we're able to give ourselves a nice playing field to capture like an insane amount of cinematic cameras and action. And when we did the first Anthem film, that one in particular was sort of our guide, because that film required a ton of action. That film also had the camera going from one character doing some crazy action and then to another character and then back to another character. So it was a camera that was free flowing through the entire arena at very high speed. And when we were doing the scales closer to the game, we realized that there was not enough room to actually make that exciting. So that's when we started scaling it up, we found the sweet spot where the arenas and all the details feel chunky enough that you can recognize them. But scale-wise, we have enough room for the characters to be able to run back and forth and feel like an exciting distance where it is a little bit of a challenge to get from one side to the other. And if you're faced with opponents along the way, that there is some good conflict there.
Yeah, not only that, I was thinking of some of the spots involved, like shots of the audience, right? And the audience being even visible from shots of the stadium. So it's not so huge that the audience can't play a role. And I mean like the Clash character audience, not the literal audience.
Oh, for sure. And I think there's like, when you look at the arenas in the game, there's some really key elements that in the design. There's always the bleachers. There's always the audience portion that has these awnings of color that kind of help you separate the red from the blue. There's always some kind of middle river or empty space for the bridges to be there. So that's like our sort of climactic point of return. Whoever makes it to the other side, and we have a little bit of more leverage on who's winning. And then there's the towers. The towers are always so central to the game and to your sort of progress in the game. And with the bleachers, it's kind of, if you look at the arenas in the films and if you look at the arenas in the game, it's almost like from the center outward, we just exploded them in scale. Like the bleachers in the game, it looks like there's only 2 or 4 on each side. We ended up having, I think, like 20 or something like that. And it's a double scale bleacher. Because again, when you're putting a camera down there and you're focusing on a player, like a character down there, and then your camera's looking around, you want to feel the excitement of all of these other characters watching. That sort of audience that you would get from an arena or from a stadium, but at the same time keeping it small enough that the characters don't become too small. So that's I feel like that's the coolest thing we ended up doing, is just exploding outward in detail and scale, but keeping it small enough that you can still connect it with the game. But yeah, that was the best part of it.
So, but it was a process, right? I mean, you didn't start out just with like, throwing buildings together in Maya, right? There was a lot of work that went into designing these things before they ever became like a real CGI scene. Talk about that, because I mean, you were taking liberties with someone else's babies, someone else's kind of world, and building them, building an interpretation of them from scratch. So, how did you go through that? How did you, get it past all of, we precious folks at Supercell who wanted it to be just so?
I think it's a collaborative expansion that we did. We just made it a little bit bigger. But yeah, I think like the funny thing is that with the game, you're kind of on a top view, and a lot of things you don't really necessarily need to focus on. But once you're getting in there and you almost have the camera in the bleachers, or you have the camera right into a corner, or you're looking at the arena from a different perspective, like from down low, you realize that there's a lot of details missing from that top view that we usually are so used to. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of like fun elements that you want to put in there, like Easter eggs. And that's something that was pretty interesting in sort of the design is what do we add once we're down there? Like, for example, the bleachers needed to be tripled, triple the amount of bleachers. And then when you're going we do have films where you're looking inside the bleachers. What are the bleachers like? How do the characters get to the bleachers and all that? One thing that's really cool about all the arenas, particularly the Royal Arena, since it's a bit of a labyrinth, is that you could follow a character all the way around all the bleachers. There's a pathway that you don't really ever see in the cinematics, but it's there, that you can actually go all the way around the bleachers, come down, sit down, go back out. And that felt important for it to feel real, and for it to feel like these characters weren't just placed there, they actually got there. And there are details you don't see in the game, and there are details that you don't necessarily see in the cinematic, but when you're pausing it and you notice that there's a staircase that takes you there, you don't question it anymore. You're not focused on that. It just feels right. You're just more focused on the world, and it feels believable enough that you want to get in there a bit more.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of stuff like that. I mean, the one big element that was so central to Royal Arena and then became central in all the arenas was the waterfall, because we're not used to seeing the waterfall from below. We're used to seeing it from above coming out of the cauldron. But the waterfall is such an epic central part of the arena that there was a lot of discussion and a lot of design that we went through back and forth on how big do we make it? What is the scale of it? And what is it constructed of? And in the end, I think we ended up with a very, very cool representation of it. It's exactly like what you see in the game, but the scale from below is just so grand that it gives the arena that opulence that deserves to be called Royal Arena. It has that wealth to it and that scale that the Royals would have built it with. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have also built out the Hog Mountain Arena, which was revealed for the first time, I think, when Clash Royale was 1 year old, and later you built the Legendary Arena, and I know, Trevor, you've used the Legendary Arena as well. In fact, Trevor decked out the Legendary Arena for the first time in Halloween, and then flooded it with Haunted Elixir. So, like, all of you have not only taken our world and interpreted it, you've also taken our world and embellished it, in really what was that like for you, Trevor?
I think it was, taking these worlds that, have been exploded and kind of blown out of proportion is super fun. I think trying to figure out new ways to show how the game is developing as well is really exciting, because the new skins for each season has kind of been a new addition for us, and trying again to be true to the game art that we see that comes in and replicating that in an honest way, so that these cinematics do that justice. There's a little bit of technical figuring out the proper scale of the ooze and where it falls from, and how much it's actually climbing up and around, the various towers. It's definitely a back and forth, because, you guys pay a lot of attention to the game design and how those new towers are going to look, whether they're pumpkin skins, making sure they look right from, the proper camera angle, and that it's true to the art, that the pumpkins aren't too tall, that they're just round and right. There are a lot of little details that go into that.
It's really annoying, isn't it?
I think one of the things I learned with working with Borja, building out the builder base for the Master Builder spot last year was I feel like we're trying to replicate the feeling of what it's like there, but not necessarily exactly it. I just remember we were analyzing so much in the game and seeing how it's, a perfectly flat location, but quickly realized that wouldn't feel right, in a cinematic, just have a flat island.
Perfectly boring.
Borja, I don't know. I think we probably went through dozens and dozens of island sketches trying to figure out that perfect elevation where if you were top down in our cinematic location, it could feel flat, but still, when you had perspective, which you don't get in the game, it still had a feeling of a real island.
Yeah. And I wanted to open up the discussion because we've also created a new world recently called Brawl Stars, which we built from nothing. So there was no Clash of Clans to give us any cues about what Brawl Stars was going to look like, just the game itself. So Sammy and Ewan, you guys have worked on Brawl Stars recently. Tell me what building a world from nothing was like for that setting.
I would say, there were some similarities, I think, to what the guys just discussed in terms of, creating something that felt fitting for a cinematic, something that was a lot more grand and high production, but still had ties into what you see in the game. Creating those tethers between, game maps, but then just, inflating them and making them a little bit more grand. But I think where the experience probably differed the most for us was that because Brawl Stars was so new and really in its infancy in comparison to something like, Clash, you guys very quickly sort of gave us a lot of freedom to help you, I feel, sort of explore what these places could be and what's over the horizon. And like, you know, maybe we just have the, you know, the fascia of a building here, but, you know, what's it look like inside? And I think that was incredibly fun for us, and it was a super collaborative process. And I know that, you know, there was a point about, you know, you guys, maybe are you protective over the IP and stuff like that, but I feel like we kind of helped create some of that, and now we're sort of a little bit protective over it with you, which is kind of an interesting dynamic. But similar kind of things we faced, you know, again, Brawl Stars is, you know, very sort of vertical, fairly contained, you know, maps, built up similarly in a kind of grid, you know. And so it's like, how do we translate that into something that doesn't feel too sort of modular? And I think for the most part, we just dived in and just really had some fun with it, and then just thought about the story and what's the story we're trying to tell? Okay, like how do we best create an environment around it, and really just letting the stuff that's in the game sort of inform that. But again, because it was so young, it didn't feel like we were too tied into anything, and the game could kind of move along with us. I don't know, you and you, what do you think? Is that, do I speak for you there?
Yeah, totally. I think the one interesting departure point between Brawl Stars and the games that came before is, even though as far as the mobile game's concerned, it is contained within an arena of sorts, but when you actually expand it into the world, it doesn't equate to a stadium as such. You know, you could play in a scenario like the Piper spot, for example, where in the game, her world environment is almost like a piazza or a courtyard, you know, enclosed by buildings. But that doesn't mean that we had to replicate that in the game. You guys had thought about what was beyond that as well. So we almost had a never-ending world to explore, even though as far as the first half of Piper goes, we're just in a building. But by the time we got outside, there were a lot of collaborative questions back and forth about what do you see outside of this game square, and you know, what does this part of the Brawl Stars world look like in general. So we were just kind of figuring this stuff out as we go along. But there's clearly so much more thought that you guys and the designers and developers have put into the world outside of what you see in the game.
That's an interesting segue, because you know, we have Lightbox talks going on with Brees and Felix to talk about character design and character animation for Clash and Brawl respectively. But you guys do kind of inherit the characters, which are sort of the soul of the story. So we give you the characters, we give you their design, and I mean, they're iconic, but they're also not all that complicated. Right, they tend to form follows function with Supercell characters. So like if you have a miner, he's got a mining helmet with a candle and a shovel, and he's short and stumpy so he can fit in the tunnels he digs, and that's it. You know, no backstory, you know, no extended family, not much to go on. And so we create like these new characters by design and hand them off to you to animate and kind of bring to life in these animated worlds. I wanted to talk about that next, because that's a pretty interesting process. Actually, I wanted to start with my colleague Michael Gurman to talk about just how characters are kind of conceived of in the script phase, and how they you know, how we know we're getting it right, and then how we hand it off to the directors once we've got something down on paper.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you called out, usually there's not too much thought, or at least that we're privy to, about who the character is. Like usually we get a sketch. Sometimes we know their ability. Sometimes we get a little bit of a backstory, just like a little piece of a nugget of something, like the mini P.E.K.K.A being obsessed with pancakes. So things like that we can build on. But really, it's just looking at the sketch and thinking about the character and finding kind of the flaws and the things that make them interesting to a viewer and as a character. And then from there, we kind of start to explore kind of the different stories we can tell about that character, how they relate to other characters. Do they have enemies in the world? Do they have friends in the world? But definitely that's a process that we go through to get to the script. And I think collaborating with the PSYOP directors, kind of taking that to the next level and actually bringing it to life.
Yeah. And this is kind of opened up to anyone, because we're not just going to confine this discussion to Clash or Brawl characters. But is there a thing that makes a Supercell character a Supercell character? I mean, maybe the two IP have nothing in common, but maybe they do. So just thoughts on that, because I know you guys have all spent a lot of time with our characters.
I can jump in quickly.
Yeah.
I definitely think there's a certain design language, as you were talking about earlier, Eric, with Supercell IP in general that is iconically Supercell, whether you see it in Clash or Brawl Stars, or even some of the work that I did for Rush Wars, rest in peace.
I know.
That as soon as you see it, like, feels, like it's coming from Supercell. And
Yeah.
I think that there's a like a tone and a humor that comes with each one of your characters. There's a lot of personality and just the design. And I think we also look at, the voices too. There's a lot of attention that goes into, choices for voice actors, for voiceover, to make sure that it fits the personality of the characters. And the personalities are so big and bold for, a lot of these characters, whether they're huge, big personalities like Hog Rider, or kind of in the shadows like the Builder, for example, who no one really thought of. And I think that seems to be like a common through line for a lot of the Supercell characters that at least I've worked with.
Think of it like a Supercell character that you've taken from zero. Essentially, you basically had their character design and maybe a few sketches and not much else. Like, how did you know you were getting it right when you had so little to work with from the beginning?
I think taking a character and kind of doing a fun twist on things, it's a weird blend between like battle oriented meets kind of like 80s, if we're talking about like Rush Wars, for example, where there's no story, the game is barely even out, or we're not even sure, what's coming with the game, and we're trying to like breathe life into these sketches that we get, and characters that are still kind of being worked out, like what their techniques are, what their moves can be. I feel like making sure that they're kind of unexpected and fun really speaks to kind of the tone. And I think once you get a good chuckle out of a first reaction, that you've kind of hit it right. And we did some really fun impromptu voiceover exploration for that, and kind of just went rogue. And I think finding kind of the right voiceover talent too helps with that, and letting them kind of bring like just a natural sort of impromptu humor to it. And I think that humor is really kind of iconic to Supercell as well.
I really like that characters are like, they're always in the gray area in terms of like the pros and the cons. Like Barbarian's a great example of like the easiest thing to do would just be like, oh, he's just stupid and really dumb. But I love that you guys, set these rules of, yeah, he's maybe not the sharpest one, but he has so much enthusiasm, and those two differences like instantly make some really interesting stuff. Or the Wizard, he's very confident, but he doesn't always pull it off. So I think using that word "but" when creating characters of, taking an archetype, but making sure you put just a little twist on it, that's where stuff gets really fun. And I love that there are those rules, because very quickly when we're coming up with even little details for background characters, if you know what their personality is, it's very easy to come up with what they would do in that situation. And
there's a little caveat here. When Jack says rules, we have to put big air quotes around rules.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's also nice. There's usually, like, depending on the film, there's always a cinematic theme behind it that kind of drives how we approach the characters. But what's cool about the Clash world too, that lets it be so unique and universal at the same time, is that there's never an extreme of an emotion. There's never pain. There's never full sadness. There's never full anger. There's suggestions to it, but it lives in this very playful space that allows the characters to always be approachable, even when they're getting blown up or something. After an explosion, they're right back to like, hey, that was fun. And that, I feel like that allows the whole world to be very playful and never lean on too much of an emotional state where you might go too extreme. And yeah, that's a very unique thing to the Supercell films, where they're always incredibly fun to watch. And it allows us as directors to really push the boundary of what sort of cinematic element we need to add, like whether we need to blow up a character or whether we need to make a character feel left out. It's never so extreme that it hurts the character. It's still like a very playful environment for all
Except
of them.
if they're goblins, then you hurt them all the time.
Yeah.
That's another rule of Supercell.
Or skeletons.
Yes, skeletons
They're
too.
expendable.
Yeah, right, totally. Actually, I wanted to include Brawl in this discussion because, again, like that's an even bigger challenge. Supercell characters in Clash tend to be, or Rush Wars tend to be a little bit more, shades of DreamWorks characters, those kind of things. But Brawl characters are different. They're chibi in their design and stuff like that. So giving them life and personality, that must be an interesting process. Can you guys talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I completely agree with what Trevor said about the sort of the similarities between the worlds, and there's a simplicity, and I think a word that always sticks out to me is like a confidence as well in the designs. They're not over designed, and whether that is a function thing or a style thing is maybe besides the point. Like it just sort of gets to a point where it's easy, and it's hard to put my finger on why, but it just feels easy to dream up backstories about these characters. And whether some of them do look sort of obvious, like for instance, I think a good one for Brawl Stars is Frank, who's obviously sort of a Frankenstein inspired character, carries a big tombstone sledgehammer, and his attack is like super aggressive, like this big just melee smash, and like you could very easily just assume like, oh, this guy's just like a dumb Lenny from Mice and Men kind of like monster.
Yeah.
But what's fun, and this has been pretty much consistent on working on Brawl with you guys, is that it feels pretty open, unless there's some dreamed up backstories that you guys have had in house. It's very much like, tell us who you think this person could be, and then go have fun with it. And when we did the Brawloween with Mortis and Frank, what we ended up doing was, Chris, you might be able to correct me on this. I don't remember whose idea it was. It wasn't mine. But, the idea is that, we paint Frank to actually be this very tolerant, gentle guy who's actually, Mortis is the really like awful person. And he's, it's like his roommate, and he's constantly just trying to simmer down his temper. And all of these moments give us, once we came up with these sort of personality traits about him, that's joyous to be able to hand over to an animation team then, not just saying like, oh, in this scene, he gets angry and then he hits Mortis with a hammer. It's like in this scene, he's finally come to the end of like 2 weeks worth of like nonsense. He's come to the end of his tether. Previously, this happened. In his past, this happened. He's worried about this. He's scared of that and all this. And like, maybe some of it is just over the top, but it's more fun that way anyway for us to just discuss. You give that to an animator and you just get much more like nuanced character acting, and this just adds this richness to it, which I don't think you would get if the characters were super prescriptive or just kind of followed generic kind of traits. And so again, where maybe Brawl Stars sort of separates itself from Clash in that respect is that, there's still so many decisions to be made. And we're always super pleased to be along to make them with you,
Let's talk more about Brawl Stars. This is actually more Chris's domain than mine, so I definitely want to kind of hand the baton to him. But yeah, let's talk about how Brawl Stars was brought to life. I think we started with no time to explain during the launch.
Yeah, and Golden Wolf's been involved since before the game's launched, since the beta days. And some of the early development work is still influencing us now. So yeah, I guess we should just kind of dive into the Brawl world for a bit. At least this was before I joined Supercell, but No Time to Explain was the launch cinematic, the global launch cinematic for the Brawl world. When I first saw that, I was just blown away. It was like, it's nothing else that I had seen before. It was just really playful and fun, big bright colors, big fast action, fun character designs. Then after that, we continued developing hybrid and 2D animations, many of them with Golden Wolf. Since you guys have been involved since way, way before, can you talk about how the Brawl world has changed, how the style has developed, and what, if anything, has stayed the same since way before beta?
Yeah. Ewan, do you want to let me handle that one, or do you want to tackle it?
I was just going to say off the start, and I think you'd probably say the same thing, Sammy. But I know initially, at least with No Time to Explain, same as you, Chris, I didn't work on that one. Sammy is the only one of the three of us who's been on it since the beginning. But that kind of hybrid style was really came about by the combination of PsyOp and Golden Wolf. Like, you take two companies who specialize in two different things, 3D for PsyOp and 2D for Golden Wolf, and like put the best of them together, and this is what you get. You get this incredibly rich 3D world that has this ridiculous 2D animation built into it. And that was just the starting point. I know there have been a whole bunch of experiments in between the latest two, but I feel like that was also a good reason to revisit that initial style, because it is such a powerful combination between us two. But yeah, Sammy, I mean, you've been a lot closer to that from the beginning, so you could probably fill out that a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, that's all spot on. I think the first piece, No Time to Explain, was really, I mean, it was so much fun for us because we just don't get to work in 3D very often. And the PsyOp team are just like incredible at what they do. And again, I think, you take all the expertise and brains on the 3D side and mix them with the equivalent on our side. Like, we were just able to let everybody do what they do best, and nobody was sort of, doing any guesswork or whatever. It was just a bunch of really talented people, which is obviously always a joy. But again, I think with it being such a young IP, Brawl Stars, it was just fun to kind of, obviously we started with a full 3D, 2D mix. Then we went to do some 2.5D, and then full cell stuff. And, I know that there's been, a lot of different outcomes. And I think what's been fun is figuring out what works, and more importantly, what doesn't work. But then just seeing which of the things that sing in each spot. And I think that helps us kind of figure out what Brawl Stars is even more clearly with each piece of content that comes out. And, I think, so what's changed is, stylistically, most of the spots look very different. But to me, one thing that stays very much the same is just this focus on humor and just like mayhem. There's constantly a spotlight being shown onto these really wonderful characters that you kind of want to know more about, and whether that means you just look forward to the next spot that comes out, or if it makes you want to play the game. It's all just very irreverent, like fun, lighthearted, playful violence, and it's all just wrapped in this beautiful package. And there's things that do stay the same that help us, things like shape language and stuff like that, like maintaining this chunky, overstated, sort of exaggerated style to the buildings and the weapons and stuff like that help kind of ground everything in the same universe, even if they do look, if they do have a different look and feel. But to us, it feels like it's still like we're still kind of figuring things out, which is such a fun place to be,
Yeah, the Brawl is kind of an interesting game. It's newer, and we're very community focused. We intentionally were very cautious about adding too much backstory or detail to the worlds and the characters too early. We're cautious because we want the players in the community to kind of like live with the characters and to own them themselves. So one thing that we do is we try to like keep them from being too specific too early on. And then another weird thing that we do is we try to appeal to both the players, the community that already plays the game, and just broader general audiences that don't play the game. That's a weird balance, I'd say. Like throwing characters in a story at you and say, go make something really cool, but don't do too much. We don't want to reveal this yet. How do you balance things that are like somewhere between too generic and too specific?
aren't there as well? I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the community also kind of infer so much themselves from what they're seeing as well. Like the one that I like the most is that they believe in this love story between Rico and Bibi. Was that something that you guys seeded, or did they come up with that all on their own?
Rico and Piper.
Rico and Piper, yeah. I think that was like a Reddit post. Somebody was shipping them together, and we just kind of, I don't know, we just allowed it. I think Sammy, I think that was you started adding that as Easter eggs in the background.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was I know you guys sort of raised that as an intention for these two latest spots early, and it was a challenge, but I think it was very doable by just sort of making sure that I think, you know, obviously we want to appeal to people who play the game and get excited by that this is their game, and then to people who have never even heard of Brawl Stars. And the key thing was like, okay, let's focus on storytelling. You know, like we want to tell the most successful, entertaining story possible. You know, that speaks to everybody. And then, you know, if we can create some interest around these characters, that speaks to new people. But then, you know, we can create this extra sort of satisfaction and, you know, sort of give back to the community by things like Easter eggs are an easy one, but also just little things that do nod to, you know, theories and stuff like that. Because, I mean, you're right, they really don't miss a beat. And so, you know, once we, you know, there's a moment in Piper where, I mean, she's just very indiscriminately throwing grenades like at everybody who's in sight is a target. Rico happens to be one of them, and yeah, there's this theory going around that they have some sort of romantic connection. So, you know, we were able to, instead of have her throw it, she sort of like blows a kiss and it flies out of her hand, and people go nuts for that. They're like, I knew it, you know. And seeing that is really funny, you know, because the people who don't even know who Rico and Piper are still see that as a beautiful piece of character acting. It's a fun moment, but it has a whole alternate meaning for people who, you know, play the game and are invested. And so to be able to entertain on those two levels is something that, like, it's very uncommon for us as a studio. But it's incredibly rewarding, but it's very much just kind of trial and error and sort of figuring it out as we go, I would say.
Yeah, for us, it's a weird thing, I'd say. We're trying to make something that's entertaining in the moment, but we also want people to rewatch it for like years and years to come. Same as how we approach the games. It's like we want everybody to play it. We want it for as many people as possible, but we want them to keep playing for years and years.
That feels, I would just jump in real quick. That feels very quintessentially Supercell too, like a real staple of, you know, putting in all those little nuggets and hidden gems from comments in the YouTube videos to, you know, moments from previous games that are speckled into it, whether it's in Brawl Stars or Clash of Clans or Clash Royale. Like that's, I feel like it's a really nice sort of nod back to the community and something that I love taking a part in too, just as a, you know, a Royale player myself.
We gave Barley a wizard skin right out the bat, but you know, that was a marketing stunt. So
yeah, no, but I mean, yeah, like even like with Builder Leaves, you know, doing a little like replica of the last lava pup, you know, small little winks and nods back to other parts of, you know, the campaign is, feels very true to your guys' brand.
Yeah. So one of the things that actually I think Brawl really kind of inspired was like this amazing combination of 2D and 3D. It's something we hadn't done before. And it's not only something that we did in Brawl starting in No Time to Explain, but it's also something that we loved so much that we borrowed for Rush Wars. So we can talk about that kind of 2-track, 2-studio approach, because we said you married Golden Wolf and PsyOp together as specialists in both to really make this cool new world. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing we, Golden Wolf, as a studio love more than just crazy bombastic effects. Like that's really our wheelhouse. Combining the two between the studios I don't want to say it's easier than you'd think, because it's definitely not easy. But it's maybe because we've established so much of it during No Time to Explain. But it's kind of there's a good synergy between the two studios that makes it a relatively easy process to do. Kind of starting with doing a 3D block out, and then we just take that and start roughing in our 2D effects. And there's a bit of kind of a ping pong nature between the studios until we've got locked picture to animate to. I know that with between No Time to Explain and the latest two, there was certainly an evolution in technical finesse, I guess is the best way to put it. Like No Time to Explain, the 2D effects was very deliberately 2D. Like there wasn't a huge amount of work done to try and integrate it into the world, other than kind of basic contact shadows and the odd gradient here and there. And with the latest two, there was definitely a desire to take that to the next step. Like how do we retain that 2D feel, but integrate it better into the 3D world, so you do get a proper synergy of these two very different worlds. Sammy, did you speaking from having worked across both, how do you feel the process between the two kind of work differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think what was really good about No Time to Explain is it was, whilst there's 2D over live action and 2D over 3D that exists, it just felt so fresh and it felt so new. But we really didn't make an effort to sort of conceal that it was 2D. It was very much like, look at these 2D effects, like mixed in with these 3D characters. It was very much a stylistic and a sort of artistic choice. And looking back on it, I still love that piece. But I think we all kind of decided that there's more to gain from making everything feel like it's all in this world. It doesn't need to be 2D, 3D. Like let's blur the edges and let's just create like a really colorful, exciting world. And so on these latest two spots, there was a lot of time and a lot of effort put into finding ways to ground these effects inside the 3D lighting and beside the characters and stuff. And so to the point where there's a moment, for example, in the Barley Bar spot where M's, the sort of zombie girl, is like spraying hairspray. Now, I wouldn't blame anybody who thinks that is CG. The hairspray effect went through so many more compositing phases this time around, and we really pushed things to feel a lot more illustrative and almost painted, and it just created. I mean, we're all over the moon with how it turned out. But I think once we realized that, like, it doesn't matter if it doesn't look 2D anymore. Like, does it work in space? Is it fun? Is it exciting? Does it match the character? Does it flow with the action well and stuff? And once you kind of take those clamps off, it freed us up to do a lot more, I think, this time around. And the environments were a lot more ambitious this time around from a lighting perspective. And that did make integrating effects a lot more challenging. But I think we ended up with something that just felt like a lot more packaged up, and it wasn't quite so sort of superimposed. I don't want to use that word really, but it wasn't about, hey, look, we're using 2D effects. It was just about a cool story that looked beautiful, and I'm kind of worried that if we ever have to do one again, how we elevate it again, because years.
Okay, so starting from Brawl Stars, everybody was impressed by a lot of things about Brawl. One of them was some of the rules for Supercell, and that's why I use rules in air quotes we broke regarding squash and stretch. So like if you take a look at the frame by frame on Brawl Stars, Colt is like a piece of taffy. I mean, he is just as tall as the screen in some of the shots. And I remember the first time like we did that in Clash, it was almost like a subversive act, because that was a rule of Clash that you don't squash and stretch to the same extent, same cartoony extremes. But in Rush Wars, and this kind of goes back to Trevor, we took a kind of a Clash style IP, for lack of a better word, and applied like Brawl Stars rules to it. So Trevor, do you want to talk a little bit about like what we did there?
Sure. Yeah, I think for Rush Wars was kind of an interesting project because, you know, the game wasn't out yet. And it came, I think, right in between, you know, a lot of the learnings and the stuff we'd done with Clash, and right after sort of the very first No Time to Explain came out. And I think the Rush Wars trailer was like a really nice blend between, you know, some of the very truisms we've learned in Clash mixed with some of the stuff we really liked in Brawl Stars, you know, the 2D effects, the squash and stretch animation, and really pushing, you know, our animators that traditionally, you know, didn't squash and stretch to the extreme of Clash characters like that, and pushing it further into kind of that Brawl Stars world. And I think that, you know, the tone and the look of it kind of has a little bit of that kind of blend from Clash meets Boom Beach, 80s sort of A-team feel, and then some of the techniques that, you know, we learned that we really liked from Brawl Stars, you know, 2D smoke effects. And I think, you know, we blended those in a little bit more perhaps than kind of the more anime feeling stuff from Brawl Stars. And I think that they continue to push that into, you know, the latest version that they've done. But it was, again, kind of a mixing of those worlds a little bit, pushing that squash and stretch, keeping a more sort of jungly vibe to it, keeping the tone very like funny, and pushing that.
Mm-hmm. And Ewan and Sammy, I wanted to go back to you a second. So you've done 2D spots for us for both Clash and Brawl, and you've also done 2.5D. And it seems like recently we've come back to 2.5D and elevated it. You know, what's the pros and cons? Like, why did you guys come back to the kind of the 2.5D style, where we mix 3D animation and 2D effects?
Me and Ewan were asking ourselves this question earlier.
Okay.
Not that we don't love it. I was just thinking, why? I thought maybe it's just because you guys loved it. It's I don't know. I mean, again, it's an opportunity for us to work on a bit of a grander scale. I think is certainly one of the main reasons for me. I mean, we're a relatively small studio. You know, we're about 20 in the UK and about 5 in New York. So, you know, just in terms of like the scope of the project, it's not something that we could, you know, work on something this grand, like I say, ordinarily. But, you know, we're very close and good pals with PsyOp, and it was such a fun opportunity the first time around. So we just jumped on it just from a selfish point of view because it was fun, you know. But I think more than anything, it's just it's an opportunity to just tell these stories that, I mean, you guys are so focused on telling these sort of larger than life stories that we feel like working with PsyOp, another team of professionals, we could just maybe go a little bit harder. And it's just a bigger production than we're used to, you know.
I think there's like, sorry to interrupt, Sammy, there's like another technical complication aspect to making it like 2.5D, where, you know, when you're doing just like an explosion effect that doesn't interact with the characters, you can kind of get away with animating it on 2s or 4s. But as soon as you start having it interacting with characters, you know, and following like the real motion, or having it come off a sword or out of a megaphone, the animation really needs to start matching to the frame, you know, animating on 1s, which is generally not kind of how an entire film would be done in 2D. And so there's another level of technicality that comes to integrating it more into sort of the CG aspect, that it's easier for us to do that on the 3D side. It becomes a more tedious task on the 2D end, for sure.
I'm curious if you guys agree with this. When I look at the 2D and 3D work done on both Clash and Brawl, the 2D stuff, as great as it was, almost didn't have the same level of like drama and storytelling. I think because of the medium and the way that it was executed, it almost started to fall into like a more slapsticky, cartoony Saturday morning cartoon vibe, versus when we brought in the 3D and mixed it with 2D. I think there's like a level of storytelling and drama that kind of balance out the jokes. I'm curious if you guys agree with that.
Yes.
I'm not sure who that was for.
Yeah. Go for it, Sam.
No, you're good. You go ahead.
Sammy, you got to do it.
No, I do agree for sure. I don't know.
It's also it's a little bit of the, it's like the limitations and sort of the expectation of 2D. Like I feel like with 2D, a lot of times you feel like you have to animate a whole bunch and not let the camera just sit, which is more like cinematic stuff. Like usually you can let it sit, you can let it breathe. The shots are wider and all that. And sometimes with the 2D stuff, you kind of feel like you have to constantly move and get this and this. But I feel like when like Brawl Stars, particularly the new stuff, and even Rush Wars, there's enough there where it feels like it's got the same fun and squishiness that you can only do with 2D, but it's got the cinematic quality that you usually see with 3D, the angles and slight breath, particularly with the Piper spot. There's just a great ending shot that feels very cinema, almost feels like the 2D, 3D version of a Saving Private Ryan moment, in its own way. And if there's something cool about, like, the 3D just really ties it to the game as well, because the game has such a CG quality to it. But that marriage of the two expands it to where it feels cinematic, and it takes it away from like having to do something crazy. There's enough stuff going on, but you have this great slow camera following a character, which is incredibly heroic and cinematic.
Yeah, let that sink in, guys. You just got compared favorably to Steven Spielberg, so.
I think at least like on the background of Brawl Stars, early on the game, we just didn't want to put too much into it. It's like a very action-y game. So we were treating a lot of the creatives as big explosions, big action, just lots of mayhem and brawling. Then like through the 2D, the 2.5D pieces, we just kept trying to push it a little bit more and more. And we started to feel like the community was ready to have like deeper character stories. So from Retropolis, or from No Time to Explain to Retropolis to China Launch to Brawloween, we felt like the world was ready, like the Brawl world was ready for a deeper story, like a more character-oriented story where we can actually show a little bit more than just like fighting. But at the same time, we don't want to go too far away from it. Like Brawl Stars is action, it is fighting. At least for me, it felt like it was the right time. And we called it No Time to Explain Plus and just threw it in your lap and said, figure it out.
Yeah.
Hopefully this comes together.
Balance. The balance is just gorgeous. It's a unique aesthetic, but it's so cinematic now that you can really imagine a film happening out of that. It's like it's so lush, and so unique.
Yeah, I think we landed on a real sweet spot in the end. I appreciated sort of like what you said, Chris, not wanting to, pump too much story into it, but I think there was enough interest and enough world surrounding that people would value knowing a little bit more about characters. And also I think it's, and when I say sweet spot, there's the right place for it too, is that you give people just enough to give them more questions. Like you don't want to just answer every questions about a character. You want to have them walk away with even more and create some more interest around these locales and these new characters and stuff. But one thing that I found really interesting is I'd show it to people, and often it was not people in the animation industry, but I'd show these spots to people, and they always say something along the lines of like, there's something about this, I can't put my finger on it. And when you show them those like squash and stretch frames, it like blows people's minds, and like Colt falling through the air is a really good one where his eyes are just ridiculous, like it's like very Roger Rabbit kind of going on. And I mean, that's a reference we talked about a lot, but I think that helps meld the 2D and the 3D together a little bit more, because it is associated with 2D, and it just really helped everything like click into place. And some of my favorite still frames are those ones, where there's just like 20 fingers on a hand and things like that, like really taking 2D tropes and using them in 3D just created something that's pretty special. Yeah.
Hey, so there's no graceful way to transition into this last part since it is not about 2D or 3D, or maybe it's just about 3D. But Jack, I wanted to turn to you a little bit, because we did an experiment, which will be live by the time this goes live, where we have worked in real time, and specifically in the Unreal Engine. And what's interesting is we did a cinematic in the normal pipeline, like we've done every other Supercell cinematic, and like the Arnold and Maya pipeline. But we've also done a follow-up to that, which was done in Unreal, which is dealing with the same setting and the same subject. Can you introduce us to that a little bit, Jack, and just tell us about what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we as a studio have constantly been saying, oh, Unreal, we should try more stuff in real time. And, I think approach-wise, what we've talked about with Supercell as well is what would make the most sense would be to do it on a new IP, right? Because we put so much time into making everything look great for Clash in particular, in an Arnold world, and the idea of moving that to a different look or into a different engine but keep the same look is very hard. So that's what's been really fun and challenging on this project, is that this Party King thing has two components. One, the cinematic, which is at the visual bar that we're used to for a Supercell spot, but then also doing this real-time game show. And yeah, it's been really interesting to work in two different pipelines. I'm really proud of the team for matching, I think, very indistinguishably close character-wise to a render look. I think, in fact, I've been, creatively very impressed just by how quickly it is to iterate, I guess. On this Party King cinematic, we were, talking 12 hours a frame to render. And, at the very end, it would take, several days just to get it through a render farm for me and the Supercell team to be able to see it and comment on it. And the fact here that it really is real time has been amazing. That, I can see a shot, make a note on it, and 5 minutes later get an update. I think the struggles moving forward, if we are to use this tech more, is really just effects. I feel like part of the Clash look, so much of it is explosions, volumetric, not to mention all the millions of blades of grass on the ground. And I think that's the biggest thing Unreal struggles with. I think in the meantime, we're going to be looking for creative solves around that stuff if we are to use that more. But yeah, I mean, the thing I'm most excited about with it, though, is, if it unlocks the ability to do longer form stuff, then it's really exciting, right? It takes us months and months and, collectively thousands of hours of work and, a ton of render time to make a 40-second spot. And what's been really fun on this King of Clash trivia show is the idea of pulling off a 9.5-minute piece, and I think less than a month is what it's coming down to.
So
what really... Go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, why didn't we do the whole thing in Unreal, right? I mean,
I was going to say, it's got to be really interesting for you, Jack, to having been directing animators and the animation from storyboard to all that, and then all of a sudden you get to direct an actor for a little bit, like a real person that then becomes the Party King.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think one of our big reservations, because I think, Eric and I have brought this up, over the years, and, this idea of putting mocap on a Clash character has seemed very weird, just because we have a very unique keyframe style for these Clash characters. And I have to say, it's interesting. I think we found a pretty good process of, it definitely feels different, undeniably, but we do go back and hand key just, certain moments, especially in the face, just to try and keep that cartooniness. And it's different. I mean, it's cool. It's different in a cool way to see just a very raw performance and see an actor do things that an animator could never think of, or even just in, the audio performance of not hearing someone talk and saying, "What did you say?" And all of these very unique things that, you would just never do in keyframe animation. Really just bring this cool sense of reality to the character. That has been super exciting to see.
What are you guys going to call that? If with Brawl Stars and Rush Wars, you have 2.5D with 3D, and now you have somebody really acting it out, but then you're augmenting their acting with keyframes in 3D.
Real D.
Real D. You invented a new
I'm trademarking
approach. Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Patent pending. Okay. So, sadly, we have to wrap things up eventually, and I guess that time is now. But I did want to give the directors, any of the directors, a chance to just sort of sound off on, what it's like for them to have worked with Supercell. Now's your time to take revenge. Tell the world what a pain in the ass we are.
I can go first real quick. I think it's honestly been a bit of a dream come true for animation directors and for directors to be working with such awesome talent and such hungry for creative awesomeness group of artists at Supercell, that you guys have allowed us to just allow or just our dreams and our ideas to come true in such a great collaborative way with such an amazing lush world and characters that it's been easy and fun. And every day going to work is just the coolest thing in the world. So I really thank you guys.
Venmo or PayPal? I mean, how do I?
No, that's honest. That's
Okay.
very honest. Very honest.
All right, cool. You guys have all.
Sucks. No, it doesn't suck.
Eric is a pain in the butt.
I think.
Yeah, okay. See.
No, I think what's really true to what Borja just said is the fact that you guys know what you're talking about. I mean, a lot of you guys come from X kind of film worlds or animation backgrounds, unlike a lot of our other clients. And there is a standard and a quality that you guys expect that a lot of our other clients don't. And it's the same that we do too. It's just, we a lot of times don't have the time or the resources to push for that. And having you guys help back and push that, I think you see it in the end product with a lot of these spots.
So we are, though, a kind of a second layer of input, and I think that can derail things, or it can at least cause what we call scope creep, where someone says at some point, "Wouldn't it be nice if we did this?" And you have to contend with that. So maybe talk a little bit about that. Like how do you balance like our input versus like your vision, which has to be, I think, in the end, your vision for these different spots.
I think one thing that offsets that for me working with you guys is, it's so great to be working alongside artists, but I like that there isn't creativity by a huge committee working with Supercell. It's fun to get on the phone with you guys and be on the phone with, the final decision makers. And I think in that sense, there actually is a lot less scope creep than a lot of other clients who, a lot of times will be halfway through a project and some CMO's boss's boss will finally chime in, and something will change. And, that doesn't happen with you guys, which is very unique.
That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think on our side, something that we at Golden Wolf, particularly me and Ewan, really put a lot of time into is like creating an environment when we're directing where people feel comfortable, not just the client obviously, but like the team as well, to like say what they think doesn't work or could work better or whatever. And I think, speaking back to why it's nice to work with you guys is you're all focused on storytelling and, obviously all have like creative knowledge and like good expertise and stuff. I used to hate getting draw overs from Eric though, because they were nicer than my actual drawing. But I think it might sound like a little bit overly simplistic, but when this what do we call it? Scope creep. You know what? It's just a case of like, how we deal with that is we just have a conversation, and if we're able to all sit down together and have a conversation, is this where we should spend our time? Like, are we getting more entertainment spending time here? What about if we spend the time over there and whatever? I don't feel that we've ever really had a bad experience in that respect. And I think if everybody feels comfortable having those conversations, if we can make a decision, then, we're doing things the right way. Ewan, what do you think, man?
I think you guys have all said it far better than I can articulate.
Excellent. Yeah.
All right.
I think we prefer to have people who are like, we'd rather have somebody who has too many notes, and is invested, rather than somebody who just wants to push it over the line and isn't as focused on quality. And I'm saying that now because we've finished Brawl Stars.
Yeah. This is all being recorded, that, right?
No, but I know I do mean that, and it's always a pleasure, and I hope we continue.
Okay. So last question, just to all the directors, and in no particular order. what guidance would you give to other people who wanted to follow in your footsteps, become directors themselves?
Don't do it. Become a gardener.
Brilliant, thank you.
I think I would say don't stop being interested in everything. Like, I think at the beginning there's no need to focus just yet. It's okay to be purely interested in music and 2D and 3D and storytelling and writing. Like, eventually, as if you want to become a director, you're going to hone in all of those things into one funnel, and then the way that you output your feedback and your style and your ideas, it's going to be because you've been interested in all those things, because it does involve the full package, you know. So I think it's good to keep your mind completely loose and just become an ADD artist for a while before you eventually narrow it down.
Nice.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah.
Just get your inspiration from everywhere and anywhere you can, you know, and you don't realize until you're, you know, in the thick of it on a job, when you think of some obscure reference or like this cooking show you saw or this song or like something, you know. And it's another nice thing about working with PsyOp is being able to mix with so many people who, you know, like 3D artists and people that we don't normally spend time with, and just seeing how you can draw inspiration and reference from everything. So I think that's a really nice point.
Yeah, and start thinking about what stories you like to tell and what stories you like to watch or read yourself. That's as good a guide as any.
I'd say just make stuff. Just keep making things, you know, and share them too. I would post it, share it, because you'll grow from, you know, even finishing things that you look back on that you don't like. I think if you have an opportunity at work to make it, great. You know, if not, do it on the side, but just keep crafting, keep making things, because you learn from experiences.
I think for me, the thing that, you know, when I've seen artists rise up to the rank to director or to, you know, senior leadership are the people that bring ideas to every project. You know, I call them button pushers, artists that, you know, they just do exactly what you told them to do and nothing more. And I think, you know, if you can have the personality, no matter what you're doing in any capacity on, you know, a design project, of bringing your own flourish or suggesting a new idea, I think, you know, that's the trait that allows people to rise up.
I think one last tiny thing is, it is true that it says, it's being said a lot, that it takes a village. I think you have to imagine too, behind every film that PsyOp and Golden Wolf has ever made for Supercell, there's so many people, like so many insanely talented people that come into it, and every single artist, whether it's the guy doing just the chair in the background or whatever, or the girl who did a cloud or something like that, every single person has contributed an idea that's kind of allowed it to grow. So it's important to love collaboration. Everything's about collaboration, and you as an individual can't make anything. You need everybody together. So I think that's a huge thing that's really awesome about PsyOp, Golden Wolf, and Supercell. There's just insane teams behind it all, just to create one perfect square image, which I think is really fascinating.
Make things with people you like.
I wanted to thank all of you guys for joining us today, and just for kind of peeling back the curtain on how we've done all this and how we'll continue to do all this. It's been great working with you, and thank you for coming along for the journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.